Welcome to the Voices of Hospice Leadership podcast, the show that reveals how to take your hospice to the next level. We cover all things hospice, from marketing and automation to billing and operations. You'll also hear from professionals in the industry as they share their stories of success and practice growth tactics. Here is your host, Brian France.
All right, today I'm joined by Raphael, owner of Blue Monarch Hospice, serving families across San Diego's North County, from Poway on up. We're unpacking a crucial distinction many families and even clinicians wrestle with: eligibility versus readiness for hospice. And we'll also clarify some common myths like whether hospice provides 24/7 in-home care, and talk through how marketing and community education can reduce crisis decisions, especially around the holidays. So finally, we'll get practical about what drives census growth in a crowded market and the partnerships that make the biggest difference. So welcome, Raphael. Glad to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah, welcome. So can you tell us a little bit about your role at Blue Monarch and how you came into the hospice space?
Yeah, I am currently the CEO of Blue Monarch Hospice. I've been a nurse essentially my whole life. Became a nurse practitioner back in 2017. So I've been in the healthcare field my whole adult life. I was in a different business prior to hospice, specializing in men's health clinics with hormone replacement, things of that nature, which is a passion of mine. A good friend of mine who is in the hospice space thought it would be a good fit for me as well, given my clinical background. So he said, "Oh, you might be good at this hospice thing. You should give it a crack." But yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. I didn't know really what I was getting myself into, but I just jumped 2 feet in, and then here we are.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What didn't you know at the start that you wish maybe that you had known?
I mean, there's so many different things. Where do I begin?
Yeah.
One is like how capital intensive it is. So in other words, how expensive it is to start one. That's one. Two is how difficult it is to recruit staff just because you're brand new. So no one knows who you are, what this company is. So recruiting staff is very, very difficult. And then just like the nuances that most people don't understand unless you're in the industry, right? Relationships between facilities and the hospice, communicating with families, and just kind of getting them comfortable with the whole hospice, philosophy. So there's a lot of things that you don't know, just like a lot of things, right? So you just kind of learn as you go. But there was many challenges in the beginning, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And so I was correct. What regions do you serve in San Diego?
Just mostly North County, San Diego. So it's kind of from kind of like the middle area. So from Poway up is where we
Yep.
service. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Not opposed to service all of San Diego County, but our focus is mostly from Poway up to North County.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
And why focus in the North County rather than expanding south?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I mean, hospice is so customer service focused, and rightfully so. So the biggest thing for us is most of our staff are North County based. I am as well. So San Diego, as you aware, is a very big county. So customer service can be tricky or a little more difficult if you're having your staff go from point A to point B. So we try to keep it in a reasonable driving distance for people. So that's why we service mostly North County. Eventually we might service South, but ideally we'll definitely have staff down there before we do that. But the reason why we do North County is just because it's just easier for staff. And I also live in North County, so it's also easier for me as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And what would you say is like unique about Blue Monarch Hospice?
I would say we're locally owned, right? You don't have this, 10, 20, 30 chain of command you have to go through. And, it's owned by a clinician myself. We always put the patient first. So no matter what's going on, we use available resources to, always be the forefront of any patient issue there is. So I would say the biggest thing, the differentiators is like one, with, locally owned, and then two, our service area. So our service area is just, like I said, from middle of from middle of San Diego all the way up. So that's kind of been a good differentiator for us.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah.
And how do you or how do families describe the feel of your care when they meet you or your team?
Yeah, I think communication is a big thing. I think we're overly communicative and you have to be in hospice. So I think a lot of times when they call, they always get to speak to someone. So I think they have like a small kind of company feel to it, the interactions that they have with our staff. And obviously our staff are, they're pretty amazing. So we make an effort where, people don't have, a ton of patients on their caseload and things of that nature, so they can spend, quality time with the patient and the family members as well.
Awesome. Let's move into the eligibility versus readiness
Yeah.
conversation or topic. How do you
Yeah.
explain the eligibility versus readiness to families and physicians?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not the best at it. There's a lot of nuances behind it, but there are many factors that come into play when that hospice discussion is had. So oftentimes,
Hmm.
let's say, for example, the doctor might say, hey, this patient is hospice appropriate, which by Medicare guidelines, you have to have, the doctor might deem you 6 months or less to live. So the doctor might come in and say, hey, yeah, I think this patient is hospice appropriate, but the patient might not be ready to go on hospice, or the family might not be ready to go on hospice, or let's say the patient can't make decisions for themselves, and different family members have different opinions on if the patient go on hospice. So it can be a very difficult conversation. So oftentimes when we come in is we kind of explain the hospice philosophy and the reasoning behind why hospice benefit it's really beneficial, meaning you don't have to go to the hospital. You can spend time at home and you have 24/7, on-call service with us and things of that nature. Uh, but sometimes patients still want aggressive treatment. So you just have to lay out the pros and cons. And you also have to tell them what they do not get with hospice, right? Meaning if you go to the hospital, essentially you're off hospice, right? And you can go back on
Yeah.
hospice if you want. So that
Hmm.
conversation is very difficult. It just also depends on where the patient is, how ready they are, and we can make them more ready than they are, and we can make them less ready than they are. So it's really up to the patient if they have the mental capacity to make that decision, or if they don't, then it's the family members how ready they are.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. So kind of meeting the patient or family where they're at
exactly.
and addressing from there.
Yeah, exactly.
What what signs suggest a family is ready or maybe they're not?
Yeah, I mean, if let's say they're signs of they're not means like, hey, they're like, hey, mom, dad, I think, maybe because oftentimes they don't see mom and dad all the time. Maybe they leave out of town, they live out of town, they come back and say, oh, mom, dad's in the hospital. I didn't know they were this sick. And they're not quite ready to say, hey, okay, I haven't seen mom and dad in like 6, 8 months, and now they're telling me they're hospice. So that's a big
Yeah.
that's a big swing there. So that's not an easy pill to swallow for them. And let's say, for example, they are ready. And we're seeing more and more of that as, the hospice benefit is becoming more and more well known. So sometimes families are like, hey, mom and dad have been declining for the past year or two. I know their wishes are they don't want to go to the hospital anymore. So I think it might be a good time to introduce hospice. At that
Yeah.
time, they might not be ready for hospice, but at least they have that conversation and get the conversation going. So at some point, when they are ready, it's an easier transition for them.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And we're approaching the holidays. What do you think or what should families consider when deciding between like hospital stays and home hospice?
Yeah, I mean that's really up to them because it's such a joyful time, right? You think with the holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas is coming up. Most time, what I've seen from my experience, they hold off on having that decision until the holidays are over. So the
Hmm.
holidays, they want to celebrate and some all the good times. They don't want to have the hospice conversation right on time, for the most part, from my experience. Obviously, sometimes
Right.
there's no time to wait and you have to put them on hospice, but oftentimes family they want to have a joyful time with their family and they don't want to really think about it and you can't blame them, right? So they want
Yeah.
once the holiday is over, then we can address hospice at that point.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What? What does the care schedule look like, across a typical week, and how does it change when a patient declines?
Yeah, so you have nurses, you have social workers, you have nursing aides, you have the chaplain, you have volunteers. They're all integral part of the hospice system, so that everyone plays a huge role in that. As the patient comes onto hospice, it depends on kind of how they are in terms of their health. So some patients can be very stable but declining slowly, and some patients can be declining very fast. So oftentimes patients can be seen a few times a week, let's say 2 times by the nurses, once by the social workers. So on average, a patient could be seen 4 to 5 times a week by the different disciplines.
Yeah.
As the patient declines, those visits can be increased. And let's say they're actively passing, then they're seen every day, or let's say they have symptoms that are not, well controlled, and they could be seen throughout the day. So it's different ways Medicare views it, but oftentimes well, most times it just goes on the level of health of the patient and where they are. If they're stable, then usually they have just like your standard visits, right? But if they're declining, then they have frequent visits, and we do a pretty good job of doing that.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Can can you address the 24/7 caregiver misconception and
Yeah, I
what
think
support like hospice actually provides?
yeah, the transition for most people is very difficult. So like, you can think about yourself, like yourself and me, and you're like, oh, I gotta go take care of mom and dad now. So a lot of people don't know that. So hospice is a service that's, paid by, Medicare and Medicaid. We visit wherever the patient lives and we provide hospice services. Doesn't mean we're there with them 24/7.
Right.
Sometimes in rare occasions that can be the case. So a lot of misconceptions. It's a lot of people believe hospice, they're there 24/7. That's not the case.
Mhm.
So the family member, whoever the case might be, the sibling or daughter or son, they're the patient or spouse, oftentimes is the spouse. So the patient themselves, they have a caregiver. So it's a family member or spouse, and we come in and provide service. Oftentimes, what I see is to bridge that gap, patients usually hire a caregiving company or whatnot to kind of bridge that gap. But it can be very expensive, right? So it's hard for a lot of
Right.
people to afford that. So that transition from, having to be a caregiver for your loved one, it's tough. It's very hard for most people, and it can lead to a burnout as well. So a lot of times people do think hospice is a 24/7 in terms of in home or wherever they are service, and it's not. We come in,
Yeah.
provide services, and we leave. Obviously, we're on call 24/7. If something were to happen, we'll come and visit. But usually they have a primary caregiver.
Right.
Yeah.
And if a family isn't satisfied with the hospice that they're currently with, can they switch hospices?
Yeah, you can't, obviously by law, you cannot force a patient or family to be with a particular hospice or whatever the case might be. You always have to give options. If a family member or patient is unhappy with a particular hospice, per Medicare guidelines, they're allowed to transfer to a different hospice. So that
Yeah.
happens in the industry. And, usually it's just like a, warm handoff. You talk to the other hospice agency, you get all the necessary information. They review it, their doctor review it, and then once they approve it, then the patient transfers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about discharge when family or when patients stabilize?
Yeah, that one is very tricky because sometimes, a patient can stabilize and then a week later they start declining again.
Mhm.
We have to go by these Medicare guidelines. They're very, very stringent and rightfully so because it's, so a lot of people take advantage of it. And that's kind of why it's been a lot more compliance has kind of gone into, which is good. So when a patient has, been on hospice for over 6 months, they can still stay on hospice. A lot of people think they have to come off. They can still stay on hospice as long as you can show Medicare that the patient is actually still declining, right? So you have patients been on hospice a year, 2 years, whatever the case might be. However, at some point, that decline stabilizes, and then you have to, if you can no longer obviously prove that to Medicare the decline, you have to discharge them. And
Yeah.
that's a very can be a very difficult conversation with the patient and the family, especially when they're used to your staff, they love the care and things of that nature. But you just have to explain to them like this is, we're playing by Medicare guidelines here, and this is unfortunately what they ask us to do. And if you start declining again, then you can come right back on hospice.
Yep.
but that's usually a conversation we have with the patient and family.
Yeah, and that could be tough, tough position for that person, or tough to understand, right?
Yeah, yeah, it can be very difficult. It can be very
Yeah,
difficult. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, no, I love the that just speaks to the care that your team could provide, right? If someone did get cared for, now they're up, they're stabilized, like that speaks to the care that was provided to them.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think, oftentimes, it keeps them away from the hospital, which no one wants to go to the hospital, right? It keeps them away from, having to go to a bunch of doctor's visits. So it keeps them comfortable at home, and that's what most people want.
Yeah, love
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
And what's in your marketing mix today for Blue Monarch?
Yeah, I luckily I have two great marketers. So I have Connie and Maria. Connie's been with me for a good amount of time. Initially, it was just me doing all the marketing, obviously just boots on the ground. So most of our marketing mixture just been just connections, relationships. That's really
Yeah,
all it's been, and obviously through our care, and word of mouth and things of that nature. So we're just trying to immerse ourselves in the community as a thought leader in the hospice industry, and obviously speaks through our care as well. So that's kind of what we're doing with marketing is just relationships, building relationships.
yeah, yeah. Boots on the ground, relationships.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
And what pieces are or what like what about like digitally? Like, are you doing anything with online, like on Facebook or Instagram, anything like that?
Yeah, I'm not. I think when I initially started, that's how I was a little naive. I think I did Facebook ads. I think I did that in the beginning. But
Yeah,
once I started to realize with hospice, it's very such a personal thing, and such an emotional thing. So oftentimes, um, and I think that would change as the new generation comes who are more digital savvy. So right now with the baby boomers, most of them their kids are going to be more tech savvy. So they might say, okay, hey, mom and dad might be declined a year or two. Let me start doing some research on hospices so they can go online and search. But right now, with this generation, they're not very, I wouldn't say they're not tech savvy, but they're not, thinking about going online to look for hospices. Oftentimes, they go off based off the recommendation of someone else, right? So the resident care director, the physician, the facility, social worker, whatever the case manager, whatever the case might be. So you usually just go off recommendations as opposed to searching online. Some people do. I'm not saying some people don't, because
right.
sometimes I do get inquiries online. People they reach out and want to learn more about our hospice um, services, but it's not a ton of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, social media, that could be a tough place to advertise. I know Facebook doesn't like advertising, the end or whatever, whatever you want to call it. But uh
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
that but yeah, there's other, like, have you tried Google ads or anything like that?
That's the only one I tried. So I tried Google Ads in the beginning.
Yeah.
I don't really recall. I don't think we had great success with it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't recall if we had minimal success with it. I don't think much came out of it. But we did do SEO, so we did a little bit of that in the beginning, and that was good. Kind of get
Yeah.
us some digital presence. But like I said, it's I think with the new generation, a lot of them are going to be, with AI and all these things, everything, like every questions they have, they will go online and search for it. And with hospice too, a lot of times it's like I wouldn't say it's an emergent situation, but it's like kind of you're thrown off guard. You're like, oh, like mom and dad need hospice now. Like, okay, like I don't have time to go search online. Maybe I will later, but can you give me who you recommend? And then usually that's kind of how the conversation starts, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, got it.
yeah.
And which so obviously it sounds like the channels, your marketers on the ground, that's what's providing all the ROI, right?
Right. Yeah. 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 The relationships are super important. Just like I said, such a emotional industry in terms of like what's actually happening. Like people are, this is usually like the worst times of their lives when the end, right? So they want to go with people that they feel comfortable with and they feel like they can trust. So it's relationships are huge.
Love it.
Yeah.
What about how are you obtaining the reviews online on your Google listing?
Yeah, so my staff, they've been really good at that. So usually just, when we've taken care of someone for a good amount of time, they'll just ask, let's say we take someone, care of
Right.
someone for a good amount of time and then it passed, and then, down the road, we reach back out and say, hey, like, obviously just checking back in, seeing how you're doing. And then, if you don't mind, can you leave us a review? So we don't like push it, but I sometimes my staff would ask, and that's usually how we get them. And obviously sometimes patients leave it on their own. You don't have to ask
Yeah.
them, but that's kind of how we've been getting the reviews.
That's fantastic. And so you have you trained your staff on with the script or anything, or like would you just had them?
No, yeah, they just ask. I think with my marketing team, they kind of, nudge them to ask sometimes, but we're
Okay.
not overly aggressive with it, I would say. It's just more so like, oh, if you feel like leaving one, great. If you don't, no big deal kind of thing. But no, we don't have like a script or anything to
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, and that's what I help people with
right?
is obtaining some Google reviews, but it is kind of arming the staff with a short script, and
Yeah, okay,
you teach them like we're never pushy, we're never it's just like, hey, would you like to do this? If not, no problem, and you
sure.
leave them alone. But
Okay.
so it sounds like that's working for you.
Yeah, yeah, so far so good. Yeah, so far so
Yeah,
good.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm sure a lot of people read those reviews, and I'm sure that helps your marketers in the field.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, obviously, you gotta have a good presence and good name in the community. It goes a long way in the hospice industry, your name. So
yeah,
we do our best to, to provide a utmost care, and that's been rewarding because then people refer to
yeah,
us.
yeah.
Yeah.
Have your staff or like some of your marketers, I'm thinking, are they using social media at all, like to help educate and maybe
Yeah, I
reduce the
think we
stigma?
do just a little bit of it on LinkedIn.
Okay,
But not too much. But we do on LinkedIn, a little bit, I would say, but not on the other platforms. I don't think we have Instagram, or we have a Facebook page, but we don't post much on there. But yeah,
yeah,
mostly on LinkedIn. Yeah, mostly on
got
LinkedIn.
it.
Yeah.
And what about referral partners? Is there like any content work for the referral partners, like emails or stay top of mind with the referral partners?
Yeah, not necessarily emails. I mean, I think with the referral partners, it's you build such a good relationship with them, like you have their cell phone numbers, right? So like I think
Yeah,
you're always communicating like, oh, this patient might be ready in a month. Do you mind looking at the records to see if they might qualify? Or hey, I have this issue here, can you fix it? So a lot of it is just more like almost like a not a daily communication, but at least a few times a week communication, see how things are going.
yeah,
That's just kind of the easiest way to get a hold of people. Obviously facilities are very hard to run, so they have lots of challenges that they have to deal with. So, having them sit behind a computer and email is not usually they don't have time for that.
not effective. Yeah,
If they do, is not to reply to your email. So oftentimes it's easier to get a hold of them via phone call or text.
yeah. What uh, what practices have you seen facilities or seen in facilities that lead to a strong like hospice partnership?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's always like a ongoing challenge, right? Because, we have our Medicare guidelines that we have to follow, and the
Yeah,
facilities have their guidelines they have to follow. So when we visit the facilities, we're coming to their space. So like essentially we're a guest in their facility. So we have to abide by their rules as well. So blending in their rules while staying within the scope of our Medicare rules can be challenging. But ultimately, what I found that works the best is setting clear expectation and communication. So communication has got to be phenomenal between the hospice agency and the facility. Otherwise, you're going to have like
yeah,
ongoing issues. Obviously, there are going to be issues, but if you don't communicate amongst each other, then it's just not going to work out.
right.
So that's the biggest thing I found is just communication, and then also expectations, right? So from a hospice perspective, I've done this wrong a few times where you overpromise, and then that what you overpromised didn't happen. So the best
Mhm.
method is just say, hey, these are expectations. This is exactly what we can do, and this is what we cannot do. So when the time comes we can't do that, then they already know you already told them, right? As opposed to say, hey, you told me you could do this thing, now you can't do it, right? So I think the communication is a big thing. And the facilities they have, since COVID has been just very challenging to run. So I think us having, empathy on their behalf, they could be short staff or they could, just a lot of things, right, that they have to deal with as well. So just having empathy there and knowing that everyone's doing the best that they can and not being easily frustrated goes a long way. Goes a long way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
love it.
So,
If you could standardize one workflow maybe across facilities, what would it be?
ooh, that one, I think that's a very easy one, actually. I would say it's the medications.
Yeah.
Medications, because different facilities use different software for medications. So whenever we update a patient's medication, we have to update the facility on that medication change. And each facility often use different softwares. So that's where the miscommunication sometimes happens. Like, oh, this patient, I thought they were on this medication, but they're not. So if there's like one standard pharmacy software that all facilities can use, and it's integrated somehow with the hospice software. So when you go in the hospice software, you change your medication, it automatically changes on the facility standpoint. That would be a game changer. That would absolutely be a
Yeah.
game changer. I can't even. I dream about that sometimes, honestly, but it's just
Yeah.
each facility they use different pharmacies, and it's just a lot of moving pieces. So it's a tall task.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tall task, but it can be done, but probably not by me. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
And maybe looking over like the next year, like what trends or shifts, regulatory shifts, and do you expect, and how are you preparing like operationally?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So there's a few things. Obviously, there's um hospice in California in general is very competitive, and we're considered one of the hotbeds because we've had so many hospices and so much fraud, right? So it's California, it's Nevada, it's Texas, and it's Arizona. So those four states they have this like microscope on them for Medicare, rightfully so, because there's been some bad players in the space, and there continues to be some bad players. So compliance is paramount. So we spend a lot of time on compliance, making sure that we're doing everything we need to do. And also Medicare guidelines, it changes so frequently. So you have to make sure you're kind of on top of it. So that's the biggest one. And then the second one is obviously the each year Medicare gives hospices like a pay increase, but that oftentimes it doesn't keep up with inflation and things of that nature. So we always have to manage costs because cost is rising, supplies are rising. It's just, it's just life. Like things just keep going up, but the rates increase we're getting from Medicare doesn't kind of sustain that inflation. So from a owner standpoint, you have to be mindful of that. Also, people have to have like a living wage, right? California is very expensive. So that and compliance are probably the two struggles, just because the compliance part, it changes so fast that you have to stay on top of it. And the second part is, as you're growing, making sure there's enough, revenue coming in to support that growth. And
Hmm.
sometimes it can be, sometimes so you have to be mindful of kind of what you're doing from that standpoint.
Yeah,
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, of
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
course.
Maybe some owner to owner advice for a hospice owner trying to move from 50 maybe to over 70 census. What
Yeah.
are the top three moves in the next 90 days?
Oh wow! I think one is like your cure. Like you have to double down on your cure. Make sure your cure is great because your cure speaks for itself. Your cure, your
Yeah,
staff speaks for itself. I always tell the team like you're an extension of the company because
yeah,
people might see someone else and if they're not doing a good job, they're gonna think everyone in the company doesn't do a good job, and that's just the industry. So everyone has to be provide great care, right? So that in of itself speaks for itself, and then just doing everything we're doing, but not being complacent, right? So I think oftentimes we can sit back and say, okay, hey, like, this, we don't have to touch base with these people as much because there's a very competitive space. I think, if you're not touching base with facilities directors and things like that, other people who are trying to get those referrals all as well. So I think us, continuing to work hard and being very communicative with our referral partners are super important. So
yeah,
that helps you grow organically by itself. So if you do those things, I think, sometimes we overcomplicate it, but if you just do those things, you'll be fine.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm going to talk about ask you some personal questions.
Sure, sure, sure,
Talk about
sure.
you. I know you just had your second child. Is that right?
Yeah, I did.
Second
Yeah,
daughter.
I did. Yes.
Second daughter, right?
Second daughter. Yeah, two
Second
girls.
daughter.
Yeah, two girls. Yeah.
Awesome. And I don't know, are you still going to the gym every day?
Yeah, that's like my therapy. I go to the gym every day at 5 a.m. Every day at 5
If you,
a.m. I'm in there.
you guys ever see Raphael, man, Raphael's got some muscle.
Hey, I
And
try to. It's the only thing that keeps me sane. Obviously, my family keeps me sane. But yeah, 5 a.m. the therapy session. I'm in there.
you're in there every day. I love that. And how do you think that benefits you as the owner of a hospice? Like staying healthy in the gym every day,
I think,
even with a new daughter.
yeah, obviously, other than the obvious thing like staying healthy and, being healthy for your kids and your wife and things of that nature is also like the stress part, right? So for
Yeah.
me, I wake up very early. I wake up at 4 every day just because I don't want to have to deal with anything of fires, put out any fires, or deal with anyone. So I can have a clear mind, time to myself. I exercise, blow off some steam. Obviously, you have the benefits of staying healthy and things of that nature, but it allows me to just clear my head and just be
Yeah.
ready for the day. Once everyone's awake and the day starts, I can take on anything essentially, right? Obviously, you have some challenging days and days that are better than others, but for me, and I'm just speaking for myself personally, just exercising in the morning just gives me like a good headspace to kind of take on the challenge of the day. And that's for any business owner, right? Because business is hard, it's not easy. There's always things like,
Yep.
good news, bad news all day, every day. It's a roller coaster, right? So for me, if I don't exercise, then my emotions are just kind of all over the place. And it's just like,
Hmm.
yeah. So it
I
helps
find
me,
the same
helps
thing.
me focus. Yeah, it helps me focus.
Helps me same. I could say the same thing. And you've been doing this for a while. What did you do before you played football, right?
Yeah, I played college football. Yes, I did. Uh-huh.
Where'd you play?
University of Buffalo, upstate New York.
Is that
Yeah,
right? And what
yeah.
position?
Linebacker.
You're a linebacker. All
Yeah,
right.
the
That's
fun days.
awesome.
Fun days. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, wow. And so I love that. I did want to bring if that helps any owner out there, right? That uh you get to relieve some stress every morning. You essentially get the hardest thing done, like out the way first thing in the
Yeah.
morning, and then anything that comes at you for the rest of the day, you're ready.
Yeah, it's not even just doing the hardest things, like doing something hard in the morning. So like
Yep.
you're ready for anything. It's like if I'm gonna go exercise for 2 hours and get my heart rate to 180, 200 beats a minute, like okay, whatever comes the rest of the day, it's fine, right? So
Yeah.
workload's different. Some people like working out in the middle of the day, which is fine. Some people like working out at the end of the day. Whatever you do, some people like to meditate in the morning. So you gotta find what works best for you. For me, it's just exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Love it.
yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
Raphael, man, thank you so much for joining us today and
Yeah,
sharing your insight into what readiness versus eligibility means for families. And
yeah,
uh, I think it's conversations like this that can help bridge the gap between misunderstanding and meaningful care. So
yeah.
to our listeners, if you took one thing away from today, hospice just isn't about eligibility. It's about helping families make informed, compassionate decisions at the right time. And that kind of clarity can change everything for a patient and their loved one. So, if you'd like to learn more about Blue Monarch Hospice and the work Raphael's team is doing across the San Diego area, we'll have links and contact information in the show notes. And if you're a hospice owner looking to strengthen your online presence, your census, and or build trust through education, our team here at Hospice Care Marketing is here to help. Um, yeah, so. Thank you so much, Raphael,
No,
for
thank you.
joining us. And anything you want to share before we end?
No, no, thanks for having me and continue doing the good work. I think, spreading the spreading education about hospice is very important. I think, a lot of people don't know much about hospice.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of myths around it. So continue doing the great work, and I think a lot of people will find a lot of the information beneficial.
awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem. Take care, Brian.
If you're looking to attract more families and share your hospice mission with a wider community, visit hospicecaremarketing.com/schedule to schedule your free consultation with marketing expert and founder Brian France. Plus, join our free Hospice Marketing Mastermind group on LinkedIn to connect with other practice leaders and stay up to date with the latest strategies. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star review. We'd love to hear from you.